Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on biomedical instrumentation. In the previous couple of videos, we looked at ERG and EOG. Before that, we looked at the basic, very foundational basis of visual system physiology or the electrophysiology of the eye. Okay. In this video, we will look at biofeedback, using biofeedback as a means to learning or changing behavior. What are the core feedback pathways in biofeedback training? Measurement of basal and galvanic skin resistance and the measurement of electrodermal activity. So, what is biofeedback? What is feedback? From our fundamental engineering is essentially a mechanism, a control mechanism where a system's output is measured compared with respect to some reference, right? And then depending on how much the output varies from the reference, a corrective action is applied to minimize the deviation from the reference. A very crude definition of feedback. A biofeedback in this case essentially refers to the application of a similar principle, application of feedback mechanism, feedback control to physiological processes. So, individuals can change their behavior or change their bodily functions. Quite often this is used by athletes to improve their learning, by people with ADHD or anxiety disorders to identify their own level of anxiety or level of challenge that they are facing to accordingly adjust the output, sometimes also used for learning. So, this is not really treatment in the technical sense of the word. It is not exactly treatment, but rather is a form of learning, voluntary self regulation. So, essentially this will facilitate voluntary self regulation of autonomic or involuntary physiological processes. So, what you are measuring is an involuntary process, but it is possible for you to modulate or regulate this process. So, biofeedback is not exactly a treatment, but a learning based educational tool. It is a tool. So, people can take this input and train themselves to recognize and appropriately change or regulate or modulate their own physiological responses through feedback. It essentially promotes reduction in stress and anxiety in people with reduction in anxiety and pain modulation, and essentially improves the physiological performance. What are the core feedback pathways? There are several, many different physiological processes are there. And many of them have been evaluated for to identify which would be useful as biofeedback methods. Some of them are commonly employed. One is emotional arousal or electrodermal activity measured by the skin conductance. This essentially is done through what are called as galvanic skin response to track shifts in emotional or stress levels. Muscle activity quite often is recorded using EMG to measure activation from specific muscles to control tension. How much tension is there in specific muscles. Temperature changes. So, if you track skin temperature, then it is possible for you to get information about the sympathetic nervous system activity and stress. And the heart rate, this is quite often used by athletes as a means, and the variability of heart rate is quite often used by athletes to change their training regime or practice regime. So, observing pulse or heart rate variability to develop an improved control or modulating. It turns out that sweat glands, eccrine sweat glands have only sympathetic input without the parasympathetic input to balance it. So, that means the amount of sweat is controlled through an open loop, rather from the system's viewpoint, from the body's viewpoint, through an open loop system. So, whatever is the amount of sweat that is that is produced is essentially a function of reflection of the sympathetic system control, sympathetic system activity level without balance of the parasympathetic. So, this is a unique method through which you could capture or pick up the activation level of the sympathetic system. Right. So, quite often GSR and BSR are measured using this neutral electrode placed on the palm and the active electrode placed in this location, and there is a DC current source that is first then, and the potential difference between these two is first amplified, and then there is an RC circuit, and there is a basal skin resistance meter, and then there is another amplifier that then shows the activation, which is the galvanic skin response. First is the BSR meter, which is a basal skin response meter, skin resistance meter. So, this electrodermal activity is quantified using the basal skin resistance, which is essentially the tonic. Tonic means steady state skin conductance, which is the baseline. So, this is the steady state. Tonic means steady state, phasic means something that is transient. Galvanic skin response reflects the phasic changes as opposed to BSR, which is a tonic response. Galvanic skin resistance is a phasic changes due to dynamics of sweat glands. Note that there is sweat gland and its activity is relatively open loop from the viewpoint of the human body. So, it is used where do you measure from? From the volar surface or the palmar region for optimal gland density, and the electrode configuration. What is the electrode that is used? Silver chloride electrode with DC excitation. About you measure the BSR through an RC network with a time constant of about 3 to 5 seconds to extract variations in the galvanic skin response variations, and this essentially will help us to isolate or identify the sympathetic response from the steady state conductance. The galvanic skin response essentially correlates with autonomous arousal, because I already mentioned that it is only going to have sympathetic this, and it is useful to quantify stress, anxiety and cognitive load. And if you provide a combined analysis of this with other inputs, it will help us identify, in particular with GSR and BSR, if you combine both of this, it will help us identify both the tonic, which is a steady state, and the phasic, which is a transient patterns in electrodermal activity. Okay. So, with this we come to the end of this video. In this video, we looked at biofeedback instrumentation, various feedback pathways, EMG, basal skin resistance, and galvanic skin response and electrodermal activity, and why measurement of sweat activity is perhaps a good indication of the stress level or of the system. And note that this is only an input that can be used by the participant to voluntarily regulate their own bodily function. So, it is not really, it is more of a learning process, it is not really a treatment in that sense. So, with this we come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for your attention.